Next one is about Leave No Trace and Bushcraft, and this is from Rob Hayden. And his question is, hello Paul, I always enjoy your work and value your opinions. I'm from the US but hope to travel to England one day and participate in one of your courses. That would be good, Rob. Maybe I can come and do a workshop in the States one of these years as well. There's a possibility, we'll see. I'd like your opinion on a statement that was posted on an internet forum. Hopefully I'm not jumping into a pool with sharks here and jumping in at the deep end. But anyway, Bushcraft and Leave No Trace is at cross purposes. Leave No Trace is an outdoor philosophy whereby one minimises his or her impact on the natural world while travelling or camping in the backcountry. On the other hand, Bushcraft uses skills such as firelighting and shelter building, where the emphasis is on the use of materials from the natural world to practice and refine those skills. By its very nature, Bushcraft alters the natural world in some small or not so small way. To be fair, the original statement about Leave No Trace and Bushcraft being at cross purposes was posted on a forum discussing the Appalachian Trail, which sees intensive use by millions of hikers every season. In that context, I totally agree that all hikers should practice Leave No Trace principles. If not, the Appalachian Trail corridor would quickly become denuded of any vegetation and cluttered with a litter of modern society. But what about areas of less intensive use? Does the gathering of dead wood for a campfire or the building of a shelter from natural materials really matter in the long run? What is the responsible thing to do given these two opposing goals? I would very much like to hear your opinion. Thank you, Rob. Quite a long question, Rob, but worthwhile and worth having a discussion about. I've had discussions of a similar nature with people online. People certainly have come onto my blog and looked at, say, for example, some of the firelighting aspects and said that it's irresponsible. They've said similar things about shelter building. Personally, I think it's irresponsible for me not to share those pieces of knowledge with people if they can help save somebody's life. You mentioned the Appalachian Trail. We've had a few unfortunate cases in recent years of individuals who have been quite well equipped, either through hiking or day hiking or doing a multi-day section of the Appalachian Trail and in fact other long distance trails in other parts of North America, and unfortunately perishing. And at the end of the day, it's the lack of skills and lack of experience in nature, and that's not meant in an airy-fairy way. It's just lack of skills, lack of experience, which unfortunately was certainly a contributing factor to some of those people. You can have all the kit in the world, but if you don't have some basic knowledge of hypothermia, of heat loss to an environment, of signalling, of relocation strategies in terms of your navigation skills, in terms of carrying the correct navigation equipment, in terms of understanding what people do when you're missing, in terms of how do they search for you, where do they search, having a good strategy in place in terms of leaving word and somebody doing something about you not coming back. All of those things need to be in place. You need to have some basic skills. The ability to light a fire, the ability to find water, the ability to navigate by natural means, the ability to find food. They're not necessarily something that you're going to use very much at all on a long distance hike such as on the Appalachian Trail, but if you come unstuck, they're useful backstops. And so I would say they're worth knowing for those reasons, but that wasn't the core of your question. The core of your question was about Leave No Trace versus Bushcraft. And the ethos of Leave No Trace, on the one hand, I think is a very good one, because it's about minimizing your impact on an environment that you're visiting. And I think that's a good message, and I think that's a good philosophy. And I would say anyone who considers themselves a bushcraft person or a bushcrafter should also look to minimize the impact that they have, whatever they're doing, the impact of that activity on the environment, because you can have a fire and make a right bloody mess, or have a fire and leave very, very little trace to the extent where nobody would notice other than somebody who's got some tracking skills. And so it's about degrees. Nobody that visits an environment is going to leave no trace whatsoever. Unless they can levitate, they're going to have an impact on an environment. Just by walking through it, they will have an environment. By their footfall, by urinating, by defecating, by camping in particular spots, they will have an impact on the environment. So you cannot hike and camp in an area without having an impact on it. It's just a matter of degree. Many bushcraft skills, and you mentioned shelter building and fire lighting, they will have an impact on the environment and they will use natural resources. At the end of the day, I always say bushcraft is about a study of nature and a study of the use of natural resources, but equally we need to balance that with some consideration for nature. We also need to balance it with some consideration for other users, and we don't want to be leaving fire scars. We don't want to be stripping birch bark from live trees in any circumstances, really. And you know, I see people doing that, and that gives bushcraft a bad name. You should be looking to minimize the impact. I don't think people should be building big natural shelters on trails like the Appalachian Trail, because it's at odds with what you're trying to achieve. You need to be covering a distance. I've not hiked the Appalachian Trail personally. I've had some very close friends who have, and to through hike the Appalachian Trail in one season takes you all your time to be walking and moving on most days. You're not going to be building natural shelters, and so that's not even an option. So I would admit that building shelters, lighting fires does consume some local materials in an area, and the question then is, do you want to be doing that? Is it so intensely used that that is going to be of a detriment to the area? Where I am at the moment, I've been coming here for 35 years in this area in the north of England, and very, very few people come here. If I was to camp here and have a fire and leave very, very little trace of my presence here, I'm sat on a huge piece of dead oak. If I was to have a campfire here tonight, I'd burn very, very small amount of it. I'd do it, there's a small stream, I would maybe do it on the banks of the stream where it's going to get washed away in high water, on ground that's safe. I wouldn't be doing it over there underneath some coniferous trees which are over there where I might set fire to the root systems. Consideration for the environment and leaving very, very little trace. I'm going to have very little impact on this area. And some people would say the leave no trace zealots, and there are some zealots out there, they would say you can't do that, you should not have that, you should not be doing that. Well, what I'll throw back at those people are, if you are hiking through an area with your plastic gear, your metal stoves, where do those resources come from? Where does the oil come from to make the plastic things that you're using? People talk about putting down a sheet to have a mound fire. Where does that plastic come from? Where does it go when you've finished using it at the end of its life, the end of your life? Metal stoves. Yep, they have less impact on the environment than having a fire, the local environment, but where does the metal come from? What about the big hole in the ground where the minerals were dug out? What about the roads to that mine? What about the processing plant and the pollution from the steel mill or the aluminium mill and the plant, extraction of bauxite, turning of bauxite into aluminium is very energy intensive. Aluminium plants are often near hydroelectric schemes because they need that much electricity. What's the impact of flooding an area for a hydro scheme to generate electricity and the impact of an aluminium plant and the extraction of bauxite so that you can have your aluminium parts of your stove so that you don't have a fire in the local environment? Every single thing that we consume has an effect somewhere on the planet. And so at the end of the day, I think it's an argument about local impact versus a wider impact. And in your question, you talk about having a small or a large impact. I don't think any bushcraft activity has a large impact in terms of what you can do as an individual on a local environment unless you accidentally start a bushfire. And that isn't a bushcraft activity, that's just carelessness. It's an accident. You could do that with a stove, you could do that with a petrol stove as well. So you need to be careful whenever you've got any sort of flame in an environment that is prone to being ignited. You need to follow the rules and you need to be careful. But that aside, I think it's an argument about local impact versus global impact. The biggest impacts on our environment are not people going camping. The biggest impacts on our environment are people driving to the trailhead in cars that burn fuel that are made of steel and aluminium and plastic. Even if you use an electric car, where does the nickel and lithium and all the other ingredients for batteries, where does that come from? Where's the hole in the ground that comes out of? Where does that go when it's finished? Every single thing that you do has an impact. Using Gore-Tex or other breathable fabrics, they're made of plastic. It's made of oil. Using a metal stove, it comes out the ground. Burning fuels, even white gas, Coleman fuel, you're very clean, but it's a petrochemical. It comes out the ground somewhere. And so we're arguing about people having campfires versus using stoves in some instances, yet we're burning fuel in our cars and in our homes when we're not in the wilderness. That is based on people deforesting areas of Alberta and extracting oil from tar sands. We're using wood in our homes, in chipboard for furniture and other aspects of our homes that is being used, that has been taken from clear cutting and clear felling. There is a lot there's a massive impact that we have, particularly in the first world, because most people who go on wilderness trips are wealthy enough to have the time where they can go and do those things. We're the biggest consumers in our day-to-day life. So I think it's completely absurd, frankly, that we're arguing about these small differences in a local environment when we're having such big impacts in our home lives, and those are the areas where we should really be focusing on. Now, going back to the original question, should some areas not have fires and camping and have very tight restrictions? Absolutely. National parks, provincial parks, areas that are popular, that get a lot of people going to them, they need to be protected, both for the sake of the natural environment and for the sake of the enjoyment of other people who are going there. So yes, we do need to strike a balance, but I don't think bushcraft is inherently bad, and I don't think leave no trace is inherently bad. I think the philosophies sometimes are at odds for reasons which are ludicrous. There are reasons for applying each in different circumstances, and I think even if you're doing something like hiking the Appalachian Trail, you should have a backstop of bushcraft and survival skills, because then if you do get lost, if you do get into trouble, then you've got a fallback set of skills that you can fall back on. And do remember, if you're carrying plastic and metal and things, yes, you'll have less impact on that local environment, but you're having a big impact somewhere else because you're part of that industrial use of nature, which has far bigger consequences. Look at the Amazon, look at oil tar sands, look at oil drilling around the world, look at metals mining, look at industrial plants for smelting and turning materials into metals, look at oil refineries. That is what you're using when you're relying entirely on kit in the wilderness. You're having an effect somewhere else, and it may be out of sight, it may be out of mind, but you're still having an impact on the planet. That's my view.